Okay, so I assume we are live. And hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar, part of the ongoing Peer Review Week series. Our today's discussion is centered on so-called IDEA principles, and IDEA stands very broadly for inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And of course, we are interested in the peer review and how these principles are applied there. But needless to say that these principles are the umbrella principles which should be expanded both the research, the publication process, and of course, the peer review is a part of it. So kindly joining me in this conversation are two experts coming from different kind of views on the same project. One is Laura Dormer, who is a co-founder and editor-director at Becaris Publishing, and she's also an editor-in-chief of Learn Publishing. So the person who represents editorial part and management part of the story, and also Daniel Ucko, who is head of ethics and research integrity at American Physical Society, a publisher which publishes journals in physics, which is dear to my heart as I published in many of those. So, and he represents kind of part of the story which tries to manage and incorporate and make sure that these ideas remain kind of live and thriving and become everyday's practice. And we hope that our third participant will join any moment now. And as he joins, I will be happy to introduce him. So welcome, Daniel, Laura, welcome, and thank you for responding to our invitation. I understand that the week is full of similar events. Oh, and here comes Lou. And that's just in time. Yes, that's very good. We just were finishing the round of introductions, so I can jump at introducing Lou Balogh, the editor-in-chief of Precision Nanomedicine. So again, the editorial and publishing editor side of the story. And again, thank you everyone for joining. So I will be your host and moderator. I'm Oleg Ruchayskiy, a co-founder and CEO of Prophy, a company which tries to assist publishers, journals, editors in making peer review, as we believe, a better and more objective process. So let me start with our first topic of discussion, which is namely, how do you understand the impact of diversity of the idea principles in peer review? I mean, we speak about this a lot, but can you put a credible meaning to what this is? How do you see the diversity affecting quality and credibility of the research? Laura, can I start with you here?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to take part today. I'm looking forward to speaking with everybody. Yes, I mean, diversity and the sort of the idea framework is something that has been probably more prominently at the forefront of a lot of publishers' minds over the last few years, certainly, although, sort of it's something that's, some of us have always been thinking about. But as it relates to peer review, I think there are a few sort of aspects to diversity in terms of what we mean by diverse. So I think there's issues around geographic diversity, ethnic diversity, also gender diversity, all these sort of different pieces. And I think historically, and I think that there's been sort of various studies that have looked into diversity of peer review and have found that in general, journals and editors often tend to favour inviting and including reviewers from their own sort of network of colleagues, and often that can mean that those are people either in the same country or very closely associated with them. I think there's quite a large emphasis on peer reviewers from the United States, for example, from Western Europe in general. This sort of goes even further really into sort of the diversity of the journal itself in its editorial board and its authorship and all these kind of things. But I'm sure we'll get into lots of these points. But I think some of the obviously the issues around that is that you're not necessarily getting a a diversity of input into the content that the journal is publishing. You might be ignoring certain points of view or not sort of bringing in the full range of discussion around a particular topic, which is obviously what journals want to do to serve their audiences. But I think on the flip side of that as well, a lot of journals and editors, and I think, I'm sure all of us on this call also have the pressure of peer review around speed and getting it done as quickly as we can to a high standard, but getting it done quickly. And I get emails every day from authors asking me, where is my paper in the peer review process? When will I be hearing back from the comments? So the temptation can be to call on people that we've worked with before, to call on people that we know that will respond to us quickly, that will turn a review around for us and do a good job of it because we know them and we've worked with them before. But that can be to the detriment sometimes of reaching out more broadly to a wider pool of potential reviewers to get them involved. So it's sort of a bit of a push and pull on the editor's side.
Yeah. And if I may elaborate on this particular point, so when you speak to your editors, on one side you have to think about speed of the peer review. On the other hand, you have to emphasize the diversity and inclusivity. And how do you talk to them? How do you manage? How do you present this kind of conflicting points of view to them?
Yeah, I mean, it is a real conflict because to get papers peer reviewed is sort of always what I'm trying to do as an editor. That's sort of the urgent task, but sort of overriding that is the important task of making sure that you're getting a diverse range of comments on papers, and that will improve overall. That will improve the quality of the work. It will improve the quality of the journal. We will be reaching audiences with information that they need to know. So on a day-to-day basis, the pressure can be that speed and turnaround and getting it done. But sort of in the wider sense, you're also feeling the need, and you want to move in that diversity piece. So it can be a bit of a conflict, and it can be tempting to go down the path of tried and tested reviewers. Also from a trust perspective as well. If you've worked with somebody before, they've done a thorough peer review, you've seen the quality of the review reports and all those kind of things. So that can be difficult.
And if I may pick up on this point and handle it to you, Daniel, because I guess as the head of the research integrity and ethics, you have to deal with the editors, and essentially you're doing things very similar to what we in Prophy are doing. You have to fight the traditional practice, which Laura just emphasized. You invite those whom you know, you invite those who come into your circle, whether close or more remote one. How do you deal with this? How do you able to manage it in a, assume, gentle and kind of ecological way?
Well, that's a very good question. I'd like to start by thanking you very much for inviting me onto this webinar. This is a fascinating discussion already, and I think Laura hit a lot of the points about why diversity is important in peer review. I think the key thing to hold on to is that inviting a multiplicity of perspectives is important, not just for peer review, but for science as a whole, because otherwise you can get stuck in very much into kind of orthodoxy of thinking if you're only asking the same people from the same communities and everything like that. So I should also be clear that I have a background as an editor. Before I started working with research integrity and publication ethics, I worked for a long time as editor of Physical Review Letters, which is an APS journal, the American Physical Society. I don't. I think I'm in conversation with the editors. They haven't forgotten about them, and they haven't forgotten about me, about efforts to broaden the referee pool to make sure that we are inviting not just referees but authors from a diverse set of perspectives and backgrounds. The key thing here is that physics is the discipline I work for in is physics, and it is a global endeavor, and therefore it deserves to tap into that global perspective. I'm more practically about how to achieve this is that you have to look at your procedures, because you can wind up very easily in the sort of tragedy of the commons. We have a number of editors for our journals, and they all share a database, which means that they should in principle be aware, all of them, about the load on referees. But in practice, how that shakes out is that a very small percentage of the reviewers wind up being consulted an overwhelming number of times. the graph looks much like an exponential drop off, and the key is to try to get to that long tail, to try to figure out which referees are, I don't want to sound exploitative, but they're being underutilized and they're not being consulted enough and they're not being involved enough in the conversation. So one can create methods, procedures, algorithmic procedures even, to put these reviewers in front of the editors and suggest them to them that this would be a good alternative. You can't go to the Nobel Prize winner each time, or the people from top institutions each time. You have to, not just pragmatically, but in a sense of fairness and equity, you have to be going and getting the perspectives of a variety of people. And in so doing, you are enriching peer review and you're enriching the scientific endeavor.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. And you kind of brought the conversation to the next question, which I was going to ask, the practical strategies. Okay, we understand why this is important. We understand the challenges there. How do you do it? So what's the specific steps, how to make the pool wide, first of all, and then diverse, and then inclusive? I mean, of course, we are on this as a company, but like we are, like, how do you see it? How, like, the question is to everybody, how do we achieve this? So let's start, like, who wants to pick up the conversation first on this subject? Like,
yeah, well, you
so,
called
yes,
you called the shots, Oleg. So
yeah, go ahead, Lou. You're presenting an interesting point of view. It's a narrow field, so precision nanomedicine. So it's very interesting for me to know how you are managing diversifying the pool there.
yes. So first of all, it is not a narrow field. Let me start just like Dan did it. So my background is chemistry, and I've worked a lot in cancer research, like 20 years. Published many papers, reviewed many papers, and then became editor-in-chief at Elsevier Journal, one of the first nanomedicine journals, NNBM. Run it up to 7.5 in 6.5 years, and then we changed perspective and disagreed with Elsevier, going for the money only, dominantly for the money, and in the expense of science. And they separated. I describe this story as a story of nanomedicine, precision nanomedicine, which is just a catchy phrase, and really what you're trying to do, not to be a traditional journal, academic journal. One of our board members said that many of these articles is like the clothes on the which you wouldn't wear on the street because it's a demonstration of skills. How fancy dresses can someone make? And that is a totally different topic. So precision nanomedicine, so you can imagine that medicine is very broad. Nanotechnology is very broad. And now you combine two broad things, you end up with a QR code. And sometimes nobody understands everything, and that includes me. There's no way. So how do you make a responsive and responsible decision? And that is a little bit going back to the very purpose, and I'm sorry it was going back to the basics, but the purpose of a peer review, according to our definition, is a closed scientific discussion in order to make the publishable material better. And FS is publishable because not everything is. That's often not the author's problem. Not everybody is professional writing articles.
Yes,
And
yes,
this is
and you're right, of course, here. And then yes, so this is a closed scientific discussion to which you need to find people from the intersection of two, as you mentioned, very broad areas.
Exactly. So
and
the
then,
number one is expertise. You need people that have a very diverse expertise all over the place. Number two is they must have time. to review or look at anything. And these two things are very closely related, because if you understand your area, you got a manuscript in your area, it takes about 10 minutes to decide whether it is worth something or not. So it takes a very little time for the experts. The problem is the experts are already so busy that their life is not primarily going to focus on your journal's publishing activities. So what I do is, first of all, so when then I needed diversity and expertise, then I always ask them, do you have enough time to review this article, which is in your field, I believe, in the next 7 days? And this is the practical side. Anything over 1 week will be delayed. Oh, I'm gonna do it next week.
Yes, Lou, and this brings us, yes.
Yeah,
and this brings us to the point which Laura was discussing.
Yeah, sorry about that.
And so, and how, yes, and then on top of this, like,
yeah,
if I may take it over from you for a second and like discuss it. So we understand the challenge. Now we are trying to understand the practicalities of implementation. So if I now ask, for example, Daniel, like how do you design the principles by which you work, and what are metrics and indicators? Like what do you measure? How do you measure the broadness across such a big publisher as APS, with probably hundreds of thousands of articles per year?
Well, it's thank you, Oleg. It's not quite that many, but it is certainly in the tens of thousands. We are a not-for-profit society that also publishes journals. So we actually have DEI initiatives inside of that organization, which informs a number of things, including our publications policies. Practically, however, what we are doing is we're looking a lot at data. We have an extensive referee database, which is very, very good and contains a number of pieces of information about reviewers. Sorry, we call them referees very frequently, so I tend to switch back and forth between saying referees and reviewers. So I apologize if that is confusing. We have an explicit volunteer referee program where we're inviting people to volunteer to be referees. We run analytics on the demographics and on the diversity of our referee pool. We are working towards using some other tools, including AI tools, in order to promote, so to speak, to bring forward referees that are from, not because they are from some particular demographic, but making sure that the usage of referees is more even-handed. We also have to balance this on getting the right kind of expertise, of course, but it's also important to really unpack what we mean by expertise, that it isn't necessarily an obvious thing. And you can, as I talked earlier about the multiplicity of perspectives, there's also a multiplicity of expertise, and how the expertise plays out. That's all valuable to hear from. So we're pushing on a number of fronts in order to expand our review pool, broaden our authorship pool, invite communities, and invite people who wouldn't otherwise have thought of the American Physical Society journals as a home for them, particularly in fields that interface with physics that might otherwise have gone to another discipline's journals. So we're working very much on that.
No, thank you. That's very interesting and broad view. And Laura, kind of handing it over to you again, without meaning anything diminishing. You are a much smaller publisher. No,
absolutely. I'm at the other end of the scale, I think.
Yes, but anyway,
self-publish our journals. I'm also a publisher in all the 3 areas.
Yes, and again, I don't mean anything bad or good by this. It's just a statement of volume, which is a managerial task, right? When you have a smaller publisher, small number of editors. On the one hand, you can easily talk to them. On the other hand, you have less resources. And what's in your case a cost-effective way to implementing idea principles in your area?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so I very much at sort of the other end of the scale to Daniel. So Becaris publishes one journal in the health economics outcome research area. So we publish a lot of health economics, real world evidence studies, those kind of things. I also, as you mentioned at the beginning, published the edit the Learned Publishing Journal, which is a journal about publishing. So that's a bit meta. But yeah, both of those, publish. The Health Economics Journal publishes maybe, I don't know, 100 papers a year, something like that. So on that side of things, I can, as you say, I can see and I can look and I can much, very closely track what's going on with the journal. The downside, of course, is resource, as you mentioned. So working to make sure we have a spread of we're pulling in different people. We don't necessarily have the big databases of resources that we can pull, or we have obviously our historic data, which is again a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you have the database of your previous contacts, then those are the ones that you go back to time and again. So it has to be, I think, for a smaller journal in particular, I think it has to be a very conscious effort on the part of the editor to sort of take that in hand, because you're not necessarily working with a large team or anything. So it does rest with you sometimes to make sure that you're making those sort of decisions, not just for speed and for maybe an easy life, perhaps, working with people you've worked with before, but pushing the boundaries and working with your sort of editorial assistants and so forth to discuss the reasons that why we're doing this, and some of the processes of identifying a broader pool of individuals, whether that's sort of old school ways of just looking at papers, looking for people that are publishing that you haven't perhaps worked with before, but are working very much in your field, in different parts of the globe, perhaps, or something we've tried doing a little bit more is working with early career researchers. So obviously the tendency in the past has always been, as you say, to go for the Nobel Prize winners, to go for the people at the very big, the very senior level. But sometimes I think working with early career researchers can really open up the pool a little bit wider as well, because these are people that perhaps don't have as much experience. I mean, I'm not talking about people that never publish or anything like that, but people that a few publications under their belt, they've worked in, they're doing their research, they're working in that system, and I think they can be very interested in taking part in that peer review process. It's beneficial on their side as well as yours, because they're getting access to that information, they're learning the craft in that way. And it does just widen up the pool to a broader spread of people. So that's something that we've been trying to do a little bit more of in the last couple of years in particular.
Thank you. And yes, again, needless to say how we are interested in this, being automated discovery tool for peer reviewers. And I'm glad to see to some extent we are kind of thinking alike and traveling similar paths. And let me move to the next topic and come back to you, because this is where we left our conversation. So when you say so, there is certain conflict, right, between speed and diversity, and what the toughest obstacle here is? Just to find people who have availability, in which case you cannot really insist on them being diverse, or what the challenges here, what the obstacles here in balancing the two?
Are you asking me?
Yes, and I want to go back to you, because this is where we stopped in the previous round of the discussion.
Yeah. So this is a very long discussion. I need to compress it. I understand. Yeah. Trying to keep the ball rolling all over the questions. And so the first is expertise. Second, whether the person has time. Third, you need to have the background problem, as I said. All those people who are really good experts and have a broad view are very busy already. So with this, they divided our boards into different parts. There are the most the highest level people who absolutely have no time. Those are the honorary board members of our journal from different geographical areas all over the world. So for example, there's Hong Kong, Germany, Vietnam, China, Singapore, Portugal, UK, Israel, Switzerland, Ireland, United States. So you need a geographical borders. So these are the very busy people. The next are the associate editors who make and suggest decisions those are also very broad. They must be broad by mostly they're very diverse and broad the geographical area. I don't want to list them because the numbers are more and more and more and more. So the next level is the editorial board, which we have about 70 people at the moment, according to different similar selections from all over the world. And then thanks to the fact that I was for long years working in the Elsevier, I know in person many people, and they know me, and that's what ensures that they actually respond to my emails, which I often send from my private email, because many servers are set up now to simply filter out anything the word in editor in that. It goes to trash right away, especially at universities. So this is a practical point. So if they have time, they volunteer, because that's on the other point, they must volunteer, and they come in. And that's this next layer is, we call them rising talents. And so there is the network of people knowing each other, and because we go to the same meetings or from time to time, at least a certain group. And the next level is the rising talents, when we ask these board members and editors to name us someone who they think it's a literally rising talent, someone who doesn't have thousands of citations there, but really a very smart person, and it deserves. And that's the broadest level. Actually, we are trying to make it to the broadest level. That's how we arrange them. And all these people, for different reasons, maybe for personal favor, maybe because they are very young and they want to move forward and they need all these things, then they get the work done. And again, I would like to emphasize that for an expert or someone with the partial expertise, at least it takes a very short time, because all those without expertise give very vague and useless reviews, and they don't want to say no, they don't want to say yes, they bring up the typos on the third page, and so it's just like this. And here's one more thing I like to say to this topic, that we have a category that reject with hope, because so many submissions are half-cooked or salami slicing, you know what I mean, minimal publishable information, that, okay, you said, okay, guys, that's a good idea, why did you finish it? And there is a certain group which says, oh, everybody knows that, and they just don't give the data, because they don't, everybody knows that. So these are the tiny details, I don't want to go into that, but this is practically how we make it more inclusive and more diverse, but still focusing on the science and the quality of publications, and not to mention that, you know, it's like a pyramid. The top is always the same. You can filter out the bottom, but you also can filter out the most revolutionary ideas as well, because now the peer review is not peer review anymore. Really, it's not equal. Trying to make an equal level people judge or suggest, and we don't ask for critics. Never ever. He didn't do this. He didn't do that. That's not useful. Give me suggestions. How can you make it better? Which is exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's just from the other side of positive side.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I cannot agree with you more here, but indeed, with a community of millions of researchers probably across the disciplines across the world, having the peer-to-peer community is not possible. It's intractable and square problem. And okay, we are doing what we can do, and as you can see, like every one of you have mentioned that involving kind of rising stars, more junior researchers is one of the ways to go forward in many aspects, both in terms of quality, diversity, availability, or things like that. Continuing with the challenges and resistance, Daniel, if I can take it over to you, if I may ask, like,
Thank you.
Is it the case sometimes that you have to overcome the resistance or, let's say, sabotage of editors who don't want to do it new way because they have been here for a long time, they know their way of doing it, and they think they're doing it correctly. They have strong opinions, of course, as most of the senior scientists do. To what extent that's an issue, and how, and if yes, how do you overcome it?
That's a very good question. I think that my answer to it is going to be somewhat specific to the American Physical Society and the journals, how they're set up.
Fine.
So we use a mix of what we call career editors and academic editors. That is, people whose full-time job it is to do editing, but they come from a research background and have usually had postdoctoral experience. And also, the other type is the ones who have an academic position and are editing some part of their time. We used to call these being in-house or remote editors, but we went remote first a couple of years ago, so now nobody's in-house. We're all scattered. But because we have a central core of full-time editors, we have been able to maintain a sort of coherency, and everybody is concerned with and invested in the strength and health of our referee pool, such that it discourages practices like going like the one you sketch out about an editor sort of going off their own way, because we are very aware with the shared database across 17 journals. We're very aware, it's in our face all the time about the stresses on some of the most consulted referees. We recently, if I may build on this a little bit, we recently undertook a project in which we interviewed reviewers from all over the world and from all different the stages of their career, early career researchers, established people close to or at retirement, and asked them a number of questions about their experience reviewing for the physical review. And it was very interesting. There were some very interesting things to take out of that, and I'm certainly not going to repeat the report verbatim. But one thing that was very clear with that is that we really need to nurture our relationship with reviewers, all reviewers, because it is a volunteer activity, and we need them to be motivated to not just knock out a 3-line review, but to actually give us the kind of critique and the kind of analysis that we really depend on for our journals to be as good as they are. And nurturing that relationship with reviewers, it does feed into the question where we started about encouraging diversity and encouraging inclusion, because it is a collaboration inside of the peer review process between the editor, the reviewer, and the author. They may have different outcomes they want to see from the process, and they don't have the same motivations or the same stakes at all times, but it is a sort of a rotating cast. Like, editors are sometimes authors and are sometimes reviewers and all of that. So maintaining those bonds and nurturing our relationship with the reviewers is very important. I think that all the editors I work with realize that. I mean, we have the outstanding referee program, and we're talking actively about how to recognize and how to encourage reviewing, not by some kind of plastic incentive, but as a society, with society journals, basically encouraging and promoting the idea of reviewing and being something that's to the benefit of the entire physics community and beyond.
Thank you very much. Again, being both an author and reviewer, I cannot agree more that this relationship between a journal editor, reviewer, and author should be kind of more well-forged and more maybe collaborative, because science is a collaborative endeavor, and on the peer reviewing side, that's sometimes not that obvious. Again, it's like my experience, which I guess broadly shared by the community as well. So yes, I very much support it. Laura, before we move to our next question, which slightly shifts the gears, what is there anything you want to add to your previous kind of narrative about the effective communicating this and training strategies, and what works well for your teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps not specific to my team, but just more broadly, I think, we've mentioned about bringing in sort of wider group of people. We've talked about rising stars and early career research and so forth. I think one of the important things to sort of underpin that is making sure that those people have, or anyone really that's reviewing, has access to resources to help sort of with training and support of that, whether that's sort of support from the journal and the publisher. I know sort of lots of publishers have plenty of materials and resources and even sort of webinars and training programs that reviewers can take on, or whether that's sort of more within a department, or often more senior researchers might sort of delegate peer review activities to junior colleagues and sort of working as I know some journals have a sort of a co-peer review model where a more senior person will peer review a paper with a junior colleague and provide that sort of level of feedback to sort of build on those skills. And I think that's quite important as well, so that people perhaps are doing their first reviews. They may have received review comments on papers they've published, but they're not as experienced in acting as that reviewer. Having guidance around how to do that process well, and so forth, I think is quite important as well, and it's something that publishers can probably do more of. I think certainly on my side, it's something that I think we could do more of in terms of, we have reviewer guidelines, but is there more that we could provide to help support that process for less experienced reviewers?
Thank you very much. Again, the idea, the initiative of kind of double peer reviews when a junior and more senior colleagues work together sounds very kind of promising and very interesting for me. Sometimes when I do the review, I do it together with my students, or sometimes I hand it over to my students, and then I kind of recommend them to the journals that may work, and it gives them the kind of required head start. So that's indeed very important. I want to move to the next topic, which, Daniel, you mentioned already, so I will start with asking you. Technology. Can we do something across the technological lines, like especially in this advent of new AI, very powerful AI tools, to make peer review not only better just as a quality, but also diverse, inclusive, accessible, so adhering to the ideas principles?
Yes, and I'm going to elaborate on that.
Please.
I'm not going to just leave it at that. Yes, absolutely we can. I think that there are a number of repetitive tasks and repetitive searches that are being run. I mean, if AI and if technology is good for anything, it is about taking a large amount of information, synthesizing it, and putting it in a form that is useful to the human user. That is absolutely something which technology can help us with. I think that the important thing is to realize, and there are a couple of caveats, and you didn't really ask about caveats, but I'm going to mention them anyway, which is that all of these programs, especially AI, are built with people and are built by people, sorry, not with people, and that they inject their own unconscious biases into that process. So, and when you're talking about selection, particularly, or promoting, emphasizing certain things, then that can reflect the preferences and biases of the person who wrote the program. So one needs to be careful to not take whatever comes out of a technology, whatever comes out of a program, as gospel. But absolutely, there's stuff to be done. The getting repetitive and time-consuming tasks off the desks of the human users, so that they can concentrate on the things where their expertise and where their knowledge comes to the forefront, so that they have the time for that, is very much worthwhile. And I think we can do that responsibly and effectively. And we're already working on initiatives in this regard at the American Physical Society, which I know for a fact we're not alone there.
Well, that's very interesting, and yes, I mean, you are completely correct. Like, many groups and many publishers are working on this, and many startups are working on this, of course. And yes, I'm waiting to see what's ahead. And maybe, Laura, kind of handing over to you and being a little bit provocative, what you see as like a potential ethical pitfalls for relying on the artificial intelligence tools. I mean, Daniel already touched upon this, namely the essentially unconscious bias of the systems.
Was that to me? Sorry, did you?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, so yeah, as Daniel's rightly said, these are tools that have been built by humans that are based on previous activities, I guess, that those humans have undertaken, and consequently might then perpetuate the same kind of biases and unconscious biases that are already within the system. I think whenever you have a conversation about technology or AI, I think there's so much potential. There's a lot of promise, I think, around, as you say, the sort of the repetitive tasks. I was at a meeting yesterday actually with a group of lots of different editors across lots of different disciplines, and it was interesting to see how manual a lot of the work is that editors are still doing in terms of physically looking at a paper. Or there's some people on there that might be of interest as reviewers. I'll Google them now, or I'll put them into PubMed, or I will look on Google Scholar, or or whatever else. Oh, they've published a few papers. It's a very sort of, I mean, to each and every time if someone's doing that, that's a process. So systems that can take some of those sort of more manual tasks, that can provide lists. We can look at sort of back history of people's publication records, their current contact details, where are they now, who are they working with, what's their, have they published recently, all these kind of facts that, in a lot of cases, especially for smaller journals or sort of society journals or single journals, it's still a very manual process, and that's a time drain for those individuals. But I think where AI will be good will be sort of reducing those, or I say AI is sort of a blanket term for sort of technology and automation, but reducing those manual, admin-y type tasks. But I think then that's where the human editor will always come into play with that level of expertise to then be able to look at that and take that information as a suggestion, but not as gospel, as Daniel said, and using your own expertise and knowledge of the field and the community to keep a check on that. But yeah, things that can reduce tasks that involve copying and pasting and searching and all that kind of stuff, I think will be really valuable. And I think as well, widening that pool as well. I think one of the things that technology I think is starting to be good at is helping to even just around sort of names of scientists. One of the big problems in some of the areas, geographies of the world, is sort of the similarity between names and name disambiguations. Things like the ORCID identifications have done a lot of good work there to try and help in that regard. But just helping editors to identify a person and making sure that that person is the right person, and that those publications that you think are written by that person are linked to that, is that is, you can sort of someone's sort of network of publications and who they've worked with and where they work and all these kind of things, sort of providing some sort of verification and trust around that, I think can be really useful, because I think sometimes that can be difficult for editors as well when you're using that very manual, I'll just Google it sort of approach. Then it can be hard to identify the right people that you're really looking for. It's particularly diverse geography wise.
Thank you. So we are at the kind of last stage of our webinar, and probably we are naturally came to the future of peer review and future of idea approach to the peer review. And let me just ask each of you about what you see in the future. What are the trends, emerging trends? Yes, AI is one of them. Is there anything else beyond the AI? Also, yes, other innovations in other sectors that publishers could adopt, in your opinion? And let me start, Lou, let me start with you. So your take on the future.
Thank you. Thank you. But before I do that, let me add two things, two practical things for the previous discussion. So we have to be respectful of any diverse and inclusive with a peer reviewer's time as well. So we cannot just ask all the time, everybody. And it is very disheartening that the guys with the most peer review have almost the least number of publications. So I don't know how this is a clear sign that the selection is not always perfect. So what we do is first of all, we predetermine whether it fits the scope. Our scope is very broad, so it's relatively easy. To get out, obviously, AI written articles, the elephant in the room right now, which doesn't deserve to be peer reviewed at all. And there is a very clear sign, at least to me, there are no grammatical mistakes in those articles. And there is no way even the most talented English writer would not make some grammatical mistakes of humans. We are all humans, hopefully. So there are more complicated things. I don't want to do with it. We reviewed for desk reject with associate editors, because it's, again, even I don't understand everything, of course. I just know people who knows. And then we run Turnitin on cross-check for repetition, and proofing for the image manipulation. So these are the practical steps we make, and then everything starts after that. So just save time for everything. And of course, if there are questions, we provide them the support as possible. Future. So honestly, that's my private opinion. I know everybody calls it AI. It's not AI. It's language models. It's large language models. These are computers who are looking for, by nature, the most frequent and most probable continuation of anything. That's how it works. And
Yes.
calling them AI that involving intelligence, it's an overstatement. They're very good at summarizing things, very good at just like the Turnitin program, which compares and immediately tells you that this comes here, that comes from there, and so on. But by nature, no AI can do anything more than collect information, and which needs to be looked at by a human. And even if it's biased, it's still not there, because that's how we threw out the really revolutionary thoughts. This doesn't, because they don't fit the actual way of thinking. So use it, but be careful how to use it, and what do you get back. And there are a lot of marketing and sales pitch behind these programs. So be careful.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you for your opinion. And yes, you are completely correct. What we call AI is now this advent of types of neural nets, which better be called large language models, and all the add-ons which were built on top of them to make them interactive, understand context, etc. I largely share your opinion. Okay, now Daniel, to you, what do you see for the future, and what other trends maybe outside LLMs and similar which are coming, or you would anticipate them to come in the next years?
Thank you. I would just like to remark the interest that we're talking about AI and technology, but we're also talking about it through the lens of idea, which is very much to do with people. I mean, there's no point of talking about inclusion, diversity, equity, or access if it's not about people. They don't exist as abstract principles in the absence of people they will have to be affecting.
True.
And there is, of course, a long history in the study of technology. Technology, perhaps unlike science, is also something that doesn't exist in the absence of people, or is a meaningless concept in the absence of people. So this has nothing to do with the future, or your question. But I will pivot to answering the question about what I see in the future. I view peer review itself as a technology. It is a technology. A system can be a technology as well. And I think that in addition to what we've been hearing about AI or large language models or network analysis or any of these kinds of tools that can be brought to bear to hopefully improve the experience of everybody, and hopefully also maintain and strengthen idea principles in peer review. I think that I think a lot of peer review innovation is still untried or hasn't been tried sufficiently. I'm thinking about things like collaborative peer review. I'm thinking about basically moving and shifting the slider on anonymity, about really questioning our whole notion of what it means, what authorship means. Certainly in physics, when you have these very large collaborations with thousands of authors, is it really appropriate to be talking about them as authors as such, or is it should we only be focusing more on the credit economy of publications? I think that there was going to be an increasing emphasis on research integrity. That's already been blowing up over the last couple of years. I mean, we haven't been discussing fraud. We haven't been discussing paper mills. Something out of scope. But as we take more things out of the hands of humans and outsource more of our thinking to, whether we want to call it artificial intelligence or not, we do run the risk of taking our eyes off the ball, rather, and in so doing, allowing for fraudulent actors to game the system and to take advantage and to flood the scientific literature with fake science and with nonsense, frankly. So I think that I see a number of trends. To bring my remarks to a close, I see a number of trends developing where we would be seeing changes and innovations, both in peer review and in terms of how it's practiced, both in terms of the technologies brought to bear for peer review. And I think we're going to have to be more careful that there aren't any unintended consequences that basically have a knock-on effect in removing the trust in published scientific literature, published research, that we need to bolster that kind of trust. So a number of interesting things are going to happen is my very trite summary of my remarks just now, but that's what I've got.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Some of these visions are very interesting for me and kind of give me a food of thoughts what we can do next within our company. Laura, to you, trends, technological advances, how you see the future of peer review and of idea principles in peer review?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the guys have covered a lot of the important points there. I think, the human element will always need to be there to act as a check on any kind of automation or technology. I guess in terms of these sort of the idea framework and principles and so forth, I guess perhaps one of the things we haven't spoken about really is the accessibility a bit of it. And I think maybe one thing that technology might bring to the peer review process is perhaps a bit more accessibility in terms of I think probably one of the reasons we tend to favor US or reviewers or Western Europe is the English language predominance of scholarly publishing, and I think probably technology, we've already mentioned, I think they said that these tools are very good around sort of summarization and so forth. I think perhaps something that will come hopefully in the not too distant future is more support around translation and accommodating reviewers perhaps where English isn't their first language, or they don't speak English at all, so making it more accessible for people to conduct reviews in their native languages perhaps. I don't know anything about the technology of it, so this is pie in the sky thinking as far as I'm concerned, but I think that would be a nice way of broadening the pool as well, and making that peer review process more accessible to people that haven't been able to have the confidence to be able to peer review in their non-native language. Then why should they have to do that if the technology could support them within their own native languages? So anyway, that's just a thought around the accessibility.
Thank you very much. Actually, this is point which kind of my fault we overlooked, and indeed you are correct. The accessibility technology which is there now can really increase accessibility, and of course not only in terms of language translations, also in various kind of images to texts, various images adaptation for people with color blindness, etc. This all can be done automatically and brought to the level when this will stop being an issue. And of course, in the era of the digital publishing rather than paper articles, this is a huge benefit for people who can now access this information. So thanks for bringing this up. And indeed, this is a bright part of definitely a bright part of the technological future. And yes, okay, we are lose the last comment. And
1 minute. I know. I don't want to unnerve you at all. Let me share something because it's just a piece of information. It came in today in a scholarly kitchen that is a comparison for AI and human expertise. It's worth reading. Take a look at it.
Oh, thank you very much.
And this is a very nice thing, I believe. It's a good starting point to think about it. And for the future, translating the same articles into languages that are very, very different, I think that has potential, definitely. But we also know, at least I do, that we are not even half are aware of what is published in Chinese and Russian, because those languages are so different. And Oleg, you should know that. And that those areas are way more rich than it is published in, much richer than it is published in English. So I'm not talking about Tagalog or something, whose science level is very low, but that does have a future in terms of publishing and publications to at least popularize. I know that many tries, but it still has a bright future. Thank you very much.
And thank you, everyone. Again, my sincere appreciation for coming here and spending this hour discussing with me. For me, it was a very kind of useful discussion and a lot of ideas and thoughts. And considering myself even an expert in the field, I still learned a lot new for me in this. So, Lou, Daniel, Laura, thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
It was my
Good to
pleasure.
talk to you guys. Bye-bye.
And with this, we conclude our webinar. And as I said, there will be a white paper version of it, which we will, of course, share with you prior to any other distribution.
I put the links in the chat. So
yes, and I did take them and open them. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Hello,
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And thank you once again.